Before going into the topic details, I want to bring your attention to the UPSC coaching programs offered by ClearIAS. ClearIAS offers online and offline courses to help candidates get selected for prestigious government services like IAS, IPS, or IFS. ClearIAS, Prelims cum Mains, PCM course, provides a highly effective study plan, well-organized subject-wise videos, study materials, mock exams, and guidance to cover the entire GS syllabus of UPSC CSE Prelims, Mains, and Interview systematically. As a limited period offer, there is a 40% discount on our online courses. Enroll now.
Right. So what is actually the Polaris Dawn mission, which was recently in the news recently? And what is the mission actually? It is the mission of a first ever commercial, or you can say private spacewalk. The astronauts actually, not the astronauts actually, they are space astronauts that went there and they had a spacewalk. But so far, all the kinds of such projects were demonstrated by NASA and all the kind of projects. But now it's a private project. It's a commercial project which was actually conducted by the SpaceX. Right. It was actually conducted by the SpaceX, and all the people were actually civilians. There were actually 4 people went to the mission, and all the people were actually civilians. Of course, they were not Indian Air Force or the the US Air Force, something like that. They were all civilians. So we'll understand what is the what actually happened, what is the significance of this project also, and we have to understand that it is actually basically operated by SpaceX. And you see the picture that it is actually a representative picture, of course. So there is actually a small capsule. And in the capsule, actually, there were 4 astronauts, and they were actually in there for 5 days. It was actually a project of 5 days, and after 5 days, they came back to Earth safely. And they had a clear view of the Earth also. They came out of a port, that crew capsule, and they had a look at the Earth, and they had this. They spent their time in the space also. So that was what actually happened. The 4 different people, 5 days in the space, and also the first ever commercial spacewalk. Now we understand what is the significance for us in the UPSC perspective? What is the exam perspective? What is the significance? So first thing is that it is actually the private crewed spaceflight, or you can say commercial spaceflight, operated by SpaceX. You know who it is owned by the Elon Musk himself. And it is actually, there is one more person, that is Jared Isaacman. Even if you forget these kind of names, it is absolutely okay. So they were having a collaboration. The Shift 4 company and the SpaceX company is actually having a collaboration, and they did this particular project. That is the thing. Now, what is the significance of this project? Okay, 4 people went there, they spent 5 days there, they came back. But what is the significance? They studied about something. One of the things they studied about was about the impact of radiation on astronauts. Right, impact of radiation on astronauts. Why we want to think about the impact of radiation? Because they studied about something that is known as the South Atlantic anomaly. The South Atlantic anomaly. So what is about the South Atlantic anomaly? It is actually one region of Earth which is actually having abnormal magnetic flux. Right. So what is actually, we'll just understand about this particular thing, that is the South Atlantic anomaly. So we say that, I hope you can see the map here. It is actually a region just above the regions of Antarctica, Brazil, you can say South American region. So this is the region. And what is happening there? And above this particular region, above this geographical region of a South Atlantic Ocean, etc., there is actually one particular belt, a radiation region that is known as the Van Allen radiation belt. We'll understand about the Van Allen radiation belt. Van Allen radiation belt. So we'll understand about that. My point is, this belt, this radiation belt, is actually very close to the surface of the Earth in this region. So just imagine it is going something like this on the Earth's atmosphere region, like that. But when it is over the South Atlantic Ocean, it is having a dip like that. That is the point here. That is happening here. So this Van Allen belt, radiation belt, is actually extending down close to the Earth in the South Atlantic Ocean region. That is known as the South Atlantic anomaly. That is known as the South Atlantic anomaly. So they actually went to study about the South Atlantic anomaly, and the result was that different kinds of, what happens when an astronaut is actually passing through these kind of layers is that different kinds of radiation will be impacted on the astronaut. So just first of all, this is a region on the South America and the South Atlantic Ocean. And what is actually happening there? It is actually a weak, Earth's magnetic field is actually weaker than normal. So that radiation is stronger. where the Earth's magnetic field is weaker, that Van Allen radiation belt will be stronger. That is the point. So that region is actually stronger in radiation. And this why this particular thing is actually happening over South Atlantic Ocean. It is because of the tilt of the Earth's magnetic axis and the flow of molten metals in its outer core. So just like we said, in Earth is actually having multiple layers, crust, mantle, and core. And core is and multiple layers are very solid, some are very liquid. Liquid means plastic, molten. So Earth's inner core, outer core, they are all in different states. So what if Earth is having a solid inner core and its outer core is actually liquid or molten or plastic? So it is actually revolving around the solid inner core. So what is happening? It is creating a magnetic flux. It is creating a magnetic field, we can say. And this magnetic field is actually towards the Earth's outer sphere. But what happened is that because of the tilt of the Earth magnetic axis and all, this magnetic field is actually weaker in the South Atlantic Ocean, that particular region. And when the magnetic field is weakened, what happened? That radiation belt, that is Van Allen radiation belt, is stronger there. That is what is known as the Van Allen belt. And this anomaly, this reduction of the magnetic field around the South Atlantic Ocean is actually called as the South Atlantic anomaly. So these people who went in the Polaris dawn actually studied the region, right? And what they found is that the inner Van Allen radiation belt extends down close to there. That is what they found. Now we have to understand what is a Van Allen belt. So I've been talking about the Van Allen radiation belt. But what is this kind of belt? That we have to understand, right? So when we think about the Van Allen radiation belt, we have to understand that these are the regions of charged particles trapped in Earth's magnetic field. Where do the charged particles come from? It is basically coming from the sun, of course. So all these charged particles are coming from the sun. And when these charged particles come, our magnetic field, the Earth's magnetic field, protect us, right? When these charged particles come interact in the Earth directly, it will be harmful for us. It will be harmful for all the living beings. But Earth has a magnetic field. So this magnetic field protects us from those charged particles from the sun. So what happens when the charged particle come? These charged particles get trapped in our magnetosphere or in our magnetic field, right? So when these particles are actually trapped, these trapped particles create what is known as the Van Allen radiation belt. So this is extremely a dangerous belt, and it is actually not very close to Earth. It is definitely beyond our low Earth orbit. And what is our low Earth orbit? Low Earth orbit is a range of orbits that is between somewhere like 500 to 1,000 kilometers of range. So it is up above that kind of range, of course, and it is actually made of charged particles. Which are the charged particles? Electrons and protons, of course, right? And there are certain times in which we have to understand that there are certain temporary belts also created. So basically, these Van Allen radiation belts are actually two types. So we'll understand two different Van Allen radiation belts. I hope you can see the picture here. So what are the two types of Van Allen radiation belts? We can say that there is an inner Van Allen radiation belt, and then there is an outer Van Allen radiation belt also. And how this inner Van Allen radiation belt is actually caused? This inner belt is actually caused due to the atmosphere. When the charged particles are trapped in the atmosphere because of the interaction, there is an inner Van Allen radiation belt. This was what the astronauts of the Polaris dawn actually recently studied. They studied that this inner radiation Van Allen belt is actually extending down to the South Atlantic Ocean because of the South Atlantic anomaly. What is South Atlantic anomaly? The reduction of the weak magnetic flux in the region. That is South Atlantic anomaly. Because of the South Atlantic anomaly, this inner Van Allen belt is extending downwards in that region. That is what they studied. And how the inner Van Allen belt was created? Because the charged particles interact with our own atmosphere. That is how the inner Van Allen belt is actually created. And what is the outer Van Allen belt? How is the outer Van Allen belt created? It is actually basically the high energy charged particles on the sun that is getting trapped in the outer atmosphere region. So these two things combinedly make the Van Allen radiation belt of Earth. And there are certain times in which there are temporary radiation belts are actually created. Temporary radiation belts are created when we have what is known as solar winds and etc., solar storm or solar winds, etc. The example like 2014, when there was a huge solar wind that actually came towards us, lot of charged particles came towards us. So what happened was that a third Van Allen belt was actually created. Temporary one, it actually withered away lately, but that also is actually possible. That is a temporary missions, temporary belts can also be created. And why we are actually studying these kind of South Atlantic anomaly, Van Allen radiation belt, etc., is that it is actually a radiation belt. So if a human being or any living being is actually having exposure to that, there will be some kind of issues will definitely be happening. So we have to go to the moon, right? We have to go to the Mars also. We are going outwards. So when we are actually moving outwards, we have to be very careful when we pass through such radiation belts. That is why they actually Polaris Dawn, the 4 astronauts in that Polaris Dawn for 5 days, they actually demonstrated some kind of experiments to understand what is the impact of this kind of radiation belts in human beings. Right. It is not saying that we cannot actually travel through them. We have to travel through some of the weaker regions of the Van Allen radiation belt, of course, but we'll fly through quickly. We will not waste any time in spending in the region, but just fly through quickly in that particular region so that there will be less radiation exposure. For example, we are having the NASA is almost having the next mission that is called as Artemis. So you must be heard about Artemis mission, which is actually basically coordinated by NASA, and it is actually aiming to send the next man and the next woman maybe to the moon, of course, and then not stopping by the moon. They want to send people to the Mars also. So it's a huge project of spanning a lot of different decades, of course. So when people are actually planning to be sent across to the different planets, they have to pass through these kind of radiation belts, and we have to study these radiation belts. Then only we can send them safely. That is the significance of Polaris Dawn. So I hope the topic is actually clear.